Tonight we explore the mythic tale of Irene, the forgotten son of Isis, a demigod born not of Olympus, but of fire and steel deep in the forge of a mortal blacksmith. His task? Steal the eternal flame from Mount Olympus itself to reignite the dying hearths of humanity. But what stood in his way was no simple quest, a three-headed guardian of the underworld. A jealous god in winged sandals, and a storm-summoning oracle who foresaw only one ending, Irene's death. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you enjoy the kind of content that merges myth and mystery. And hey, let us know where you're watching from. What time is it for you right now? Sometimes our stories are better than sleep. And other times, they just make you dream louder. It's time now to dim the lights. Turn on a fan for some noise. And let's cover what we have for tonight together. In the flickering forge of Mythic, where men shaped iron with sweat and prayer, there lived a woman whose hands rivaled the gods. Her name was Callista, a mortal blacksmith with fire in her soul and a hammer that sang when it struck bronze. She built swords that could split spears in midair, and armor so seamless it was whispered that Ares himself once wore her breastplates into battle. The gods noticed, but only one descended. Histus, the lame god of the forge, the outcast of Olympus, watched her in silence. He was not drawn by beauty. Callista was not a woman of perfumes or palace gowns. She wore soot like war paint and smelled of iron and pine smoke. But when she worked, Histus saw something divine in her movements, something familiar. One night, as the moon hung low and red over the Aegean, Histus entered her workshop, cloaked in smoke and shadow. He offered no gifts, no divine decree, only his presence. The forge flared brighter that night. And 9 months later, a child was born. Irene. He did not cry. Not at first. His eyes opened and glowed like coals, and the fire in the forge leapt as if recognizing its kin. The midwives gasped. One whispered, "He's touched by the divine." Another crossed herself, and the oldest among them muttered, "He's not meant to stay here long." Irene grew faster than other boys. At 5, he could shape iron. At 7, he forged his first blade, flawless, sharp, and oddly warm to the touch. He never played. He never lied. There was a stillness in him that made others uneasy. The village feared what they did not understand. They called him cursed, the son of a god who had no throne. Children avoided him. Priests refused to bless him. But Callista, she loved him fiercely, teaching him not just to work with fire, but to respect it. "Flame obeys those who listen," she'd say, "not those who command." By the time he turned 16, Irene's forge burned day and night, shaping weapons for cities he'd never seen and kings he'd never meet. But even as metal flowed beneath his hands, something deeper stirred within him. He wasn't made to serve. He was made to change the world. Long ago, the eternal flame had been a gift stolen from the heavens, defied into existence by Prometheus himself. It was fire not just for warmth, but for thought. Art creation. It was what set man apart from beast. But that age of defiance had dimmed. Humanity no longer remembered the debt it owed the gods, and the gods, in turn, had turned their backs on mankind. It began slowly. Hearths that once glowed without fail began to flicker out. Forests grew colder. Storms stretched longer. Crops wilted in spring. And homes were filled with the breath of frost, even in high summer. Children shivered beside unlit chimneys. Old women murmured prayers into ashes that gave no heat. Priests spoke of punishment. Scholars blamed the stars. But across villages, towns, and empires, a different fear took root, not that the world was ending, but that here is your text with all timestamps removed and formatted as one continuous paragraph, just as you requested. The gods had abandoned them. And they were right. High atop Mount Olympus, the gods had sealed away the last true flame. A spark kept alive only in the divine brazier, untouched by mortal hand for centuries. No god dared share it again. They feared man's rebellion. Feared what Prometheus had begun. They told themselves, let them suffer. They must remember their place. But not all gods agreed. In hidden corners of the world whispers stirred. Dryads spoke of a boy born of flame. Nymphs saw sparks dancing in a boy's eyes from Mythic. The winds carried a name, Irene. In the cold chambers of Delhi, the oracle dreamed of fire. Walking on two legs, lighting cities with its footsteps. And in the depths of forgotten temples, dying candles sputtered back to life at the sound of a blacksmith's hammer striking anvil. Irene had no idea. He only knew the iron was growing harder to shape, that the flames in his forge required more breath, that the warmth that once came easily was slipping away. But the world had begun to watch. Gods, both old and silent, had turned their gaze to Mythic. The divine brazier at top Olympus, though shielded in marble and guarded by fate, flickered for the first time in an age, responding not to a god, but to a boy born of fire and sorrow. And deep within him, something began to glow. Delhi was dying. Once the center of divine council, where kings and warriors climbed stone paths to seek Apollo's voice, now it stood quiet, its columns cracked and overgrown, its sacred springs reduced to mist, but one voice still lingered. Buried deep within the mountain's breath. The oracle. Irene arrived in silence. No one greeted him at the gates. The torches lining the temple had long since gone out. Ivy clung to broken altars like fingers, unwilling to let go of lost faith. Thunder growled in the clouds above, not of rain, but of something older, watching. He descended into the hollow chamber where generations before him had once wept and begged. There, seated atop a crumbling stone throne, was the oracle. She was draped in violet robes. Skin pale like ash, eyes blind but blazing with storms. Before he could speak, she inhaled sharply like a flame being pulled back into a lantern. Irene, she hissed, though no name had been spoken. He said nothing. You will climb the mountain. You will take the flame. And you will die. Her voice cracked like a whip through the stillness. He didn't flinch. He had heard stories of oracles, their riddles wrapped in poetry and metaphor. But this wasn't a prophecy. It was a sentence. She rose slowly, limbs moving like smoke caught in wind. The gods will oppose you. The world will demand your failure. The flame, what you seek, it does not belong to mortals. It was stolen once, and the price was eternity in chains. Irene stepped forward, fists clenched. So let me pay the price. A long silence followed. Then laughter, not cruel but tired. The sound of someone who had seen too many stories end the same way. You already are, she whispered. The room grew dark. The thunder outside crescendoed. The air pulsed with something old, something primal. Then, just as suddenly, everything went still. The oracle slumped back into her seat. Her mouth opened, but only smoke escaped. Her prophecy was done. And though Irene left without another word, her vision followed him, in dreams, in flame, in every shadow cast by his forge. The gods had spoken. His path was set. But not even Olympus could predict what a dying world would do when handed back its fire. Before one could ascend Olympus, one had to earn the mountain's recognition. And Olympus never bowed to the untested. Legends whispered that the base of the mountain was not stone or snow, but soul. That beneath its foundation was a gate sealed by silence, and guarded by the oldest fear in creation, Cerberus, the hound of Hades. No one here is the continuation of your mythic story with all timestamps removed and formatted as a single uninterrupted paragraph, as requested, could pass that gate without first touching death. Irene did not question it. He had studied myths the way blacksmiths study heat, closely, warily. He knew what waited beneath the roots of Olympus. But to reach the eternal flame, he would have to descend, not metaphorically, but into the very underworld itself. So he prepared not with armor, but with craft. He spent 3 days and 3 nights forging a collar, not for battle, but for submission. It was made of obsidian, iron, and the final ember from his mother's forge. Into it he carved 3 names, one for each of Cerberus' heads. He whispered them aloud as he worked. Memory, loyalty, grief. On the 4th day, he stood before the shadowed mouth of a cave said to lead downward forever. The wind here was cold, but it did not sting the skin. It scraped the soul. And the air smelled not of rot, but of forgotten prayers. He entered deeper and deeper. He walked past bones that glowed faintly in the dark, past torches that lit themselves without flame until he heard it. The breathing, slow, massive, layered, like 3 storms dreaming in unison. Cerberus. He stepped into the clearing and found the beast sleeping on a bed of ash and bone, each head twitching in a different rhythm. Its fur was blacker than absence. Its eyes were closed, but its ears twitched. Irene did not draw a weapon. He approached, knelt, and held out the collar. Then, softly, he began to hum. It was the song his mother had sung to him as a child. The one she sang when night made the world feel too big, too cruel. The middle had stirred. The left opened one amber eye. The right snarled, then stopped. They listened, and in that silence, Irene slipped the collar on. Cerberus exhaled, and the door behind him opened, not with rage, but with respect. Irene had touched death, and death had stepped aside. The road up Olympus was no road at all. There were no markers, no stars to guide the way, only sheer rock, biting wind, and whispers that echoed from nowhere. Irene climbed not with certainty, but with instinct. His mortal hands bled. His divine blood burned. The mountain resisted him at every turn. And then he appeared, not with a roar, not in a flash of power, but in silence. Hermes. The trickster, the messenger, the thief. He stood on a ledge ahead, dressed like a traveler, cloak loose, sandals laced with feathers, eyes sharp as broken glass. A crooked grin danced across his lips. "Well," he said, spinning a coin between his fingers. "I thought you'd be taller." Irene didn't stop climbing. "I know why you're here," Hermes continued, walking casually beside him without ever lifting a foot. "You want to bring fire back to the mortals? Sweet, noble, stupid." Irene paused. "Then stop me." Hermes chuckled. "Stop you? Oh no. No. I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to make sure you understand the deal. You're walking into the heart of Olympus, into the gods' vault, into a story that isn't yours to tell. And yet," Irene replied, "here I am." That smile faded slightly. "You're trying to restore a balance that was broken for a reason," Hermes said. "The flame was a gift once, a mistake. And now the gods guard it like a dragon guards gold, not because it's precious, but because it's dangerous." Irene stared at him. "Then they've forgotten what danger looks like." For the first time, Hermes's expression soured. The air around them shifted. The coin in his hand vanished. His wings twitched. "You think you're Prometheus," he said, voice cold. "But you're not even a flicker compared to him." "I'm not trying to be him," Irene answered. "I'm trying to finish what he started." Hermes stepped forward, pressed 2 fingers to Irene's chest. "Then here's my gift." Pain surged. It wasn't physical. It was deeper. A thread inside him twisted, turned. "The fire you seek," Hermes whispered, "will burn everything you are." Then he vanished. The mountain groaned. Thunder rolled. "A storm had here is the next section of your mythic tale, with all timestamps removed and formatted into one seamless paragraph. Begun. Not of rain, but of consequence." And Irene climbed higher, cursed, but unshaken. The curse settled into Irene's chest like frost in the lungs. At first, it was subtle, a tightening when he breathed, a dull heat beneath his skin. But the higher he climbed, the more it bit into him, not like a wound, more like erosion. Piece by piece, the man was being scraped away, leaving something raw behind. Mount Olympus was no longer just a mountain, It was alive. Its cliffs shifted beneath his feet. Wind screamed down ravines like ancient voices, furious to be disturbed. The higher he rose, the less mortal the world became. Trees stopped growing. Birds stopped singing. Even the stars above seemed to pull back. There were no paths. Only jagged ledges and sheer faces that demanded sacrifice with each step. Irene bled. He slipped. Once he nearly fell to his death, but a sudden flash of heat from within his chest steadied him. It was as if the flame Hermes spoke of, the one that would burn him, had begun to awaken. But he kept climbing because every time he faltered he thought of the dying hearths, the cold villages, the children huddled in darkness. He thought of his mother, hands blistered, still forging warmth for a world forgetting what warmth meant. And still Olympus offered no mercy. Storm clouds gathered above. Lightning danced along the ridge like gods pacing in frustration. He could feel their eyes now, watching, judging, waiting for him to fall. But it wasn't just the mountain fighting him. It was Olympus itself. He passed ancient ruins carved into the stone. Temples long abandoned by faith, their altars cracked, their gods forgotten. Statues of Athena with eyes chipped out. Columns of Zeus split by time and silence. Irene realized something no one else had dared to say aloud: the gods weren't powerful anymore. They were afraid. Afraid that a mortal might bring the fire back without their permission. That someone not born in their halls might carry the light that once defined Olympus. And in that fear they threw their worst at him: ice, thunder, visions, voices. But he climbed. With hands torn and heart smoldering, he rose above the clouds. And in the distance, lit not by sun but by divine flame, he saw it. The brazier burning, waiting. It was not what he expected. The summit of Olympus wasn't carved in marble, or guarded by gods clad in gold. There were no trumpets, no gates, no thunderclaps of divine welcome. There was only silence, and the flame. It stood in the center of a windless clearing on a pedestal of blackened stone. The brazier looked ancient, older than language itself, shaped by hands no longer remembered. And inside it danced the eternal flame, not red, not orange, but white, pure, blinding, alive. It did not flicker. It watched. Irene stepped closer. The heat didn't sear him. It entered him, as if recognizing something long lost. His breath caught. His skin prickled. That ember Hermes had cursed into his heart now pulsed like a second heartbeat, calling to the flame like a lost sibling. He reached out. In that moment, time faltered. He saw cities built from firelight. He saw his mother's forge blazing in the dead of winter. He saw civilizations rising and falling, each one built around fire, and each one forgetting why it burned. He also saw the punishment: Prometheus, chained to stone, his liver eaten daily by a vulture. The gods had called it justice. But Irene saw it for what it was: fear wearing a crown. He could turn back. He could let humanity adapt to the cold. Forget fire. Forget him. But then he heard the wind whisper her name, Callista, and he remembered who he was. He grabbed the flame, and it took him. Pain screamed through his body, not like burning, like being rewritten. Bones cracked and reformed. His skin glowed, veins pulsing with light. He fell to his knees, roaring soundlessly as the flame poured into every part of him. Here is the final section of your mythic epic, beautifully formatted as a single uninterrupted narrative with no timestamps. Erasing the boy, forging the firebearer. He wasn't holding it anymore. He was it. The brazier flickered, then dimmed, then went cold. Because the eternal flame was no longer chained to Olympus, it had chosen a new vessel. Irene collapsed beside the empty pedestal. Smoke rose from his fingertips, but his eyes glowed like dawn. He breathed barely, but with each breath, a wisp of warmth spread outward into the wind, down the mountain, toward the world below. He had taken the fire, but not for himself, for everyone. Irene did not walk down Olympus. He carried it with him. The moment the flame entered him, the mountain stopped resisting. Winds fell silent. The sky cleared. Even the stone beneath his feet seemed to shift and guide him, not with reverence, but with recognition. He was no longer a trespasser. He was a torch. His body smoldered with divine heat, not the kind that scorched, but the kind that stirred life. Wherever his foot touched earth, frost melted. With every breath, the cursed wind softened. The air smelled not of smoke, but of renewal, of rebirth. But he was not whole. His limbs trembled beneath the weight of what he carried. The eternal flame was not just fire, it was memory. He could feel every spark it had ever ignited, the first campfire in a prehistoric cave, the torch that lit Athens, the forge that built Troy. And he felt the cost of all of it. He saw the cities burned in its name, the temples razed, the wars fought with stolen fire and ambition. The gift of the gods had never been innocent. But this time, he would not give it as a weapon. He descended through cloud and silence, past broken statues of gods who had once been worshipped, now crumbling in divine decay. He passed the cave where Cerberus had once guarded the gate. But the beast was gone, as if even death had stepped aside for what Irene had become. He reached the world below. And there, in a frozen village where hearths had long turned to ash, people gathered around him, not in fear, but in awe. He did not speak. He simply held out his hand, and a flame danced from his fingertips into the nearest hearth. It roared to life. Then another. And another. A chorus of warmth spread from home to home, city to city, across lands that had forgotten what it felt like to gather around a fire without praying first. Irene burned. His hair shimmered like molten gold. His skin cracked like cooled obsidian. He was dying, but not fading. He was becoming something else. He had not stolen the flame. He had become it. And everywhere it burned, the world whispered his name, not in worship, but in gratitude. No tomb was ever built for Irene. No statue was carved. No songs were sung in temples. There was no procession. No mourning, no final battle to mark his passing. And yet he never disappeared. After the fires returned, strange things began to happen across the land. In distant villages where no traveler had passed, hearths lit on their own. Entire forests, once frozen solid, blossomed overnight. Blacksmiths claimed their forges heated faster. Children, huddled in the cold, told their parents they saw a man of light standing beside the flame before it rose. No one could prove anything. But they all told the same story. He walked until there was nothing left of him to walk with. His body had long since cracked and burned, not from weakness, but from transformation. What remained of Irene, bone, blood, voice, had become spark, smoke, heat. And he gave it all away. His mother's forge was the last place touched. Old, abandoned, its fires cold for decades. Until one night a traveler passing through claimed he saw a boy hammering something glowing white at the anvil. When he looked again, the forge was empty. But the flame danced high and hot, just like it used to. They say the gods felt it. That Olympus, sensing it had been stripped of its power, trembled in its silence. But the gods did not strike back. Here is your continuation, seamlessly formatted with the same lyrical tone and no timestamps or line breaks. They did not rage. Because even they understood. Irene had not challenged them with war or pride. He had reminded them of purpose. And so the eternal flame, once hoarded by immortals, now flickered in every village, every city, every lonely mountain hut. It lived in the warmth of soup shared by strangers, in candles placed by grieving hands, in torches lifted by rebels seeking light in the darkest places. And always, always, they whispered the same name, Irene. Some say when your fire dims for no reason, it's him passing through. Others say if you listen closely to the crackle of the flame, you'll hear the rhythm of a hammer striking an anvil, steady, patient, eternal. Because Irene never died. He became warmth itself. Not a god, not a hero. Just a boy who gave up everything to help the world remember how to glow again. In the land of Sparta, where boys were taught to fight before they could speak and honor was carved in bone, women were no less fierce. Among them was one whose name echoed through the marble halls like the clash of steel, Leonthe, daughter of Commander Adrastos. She was born during a blood-red eclipse as omens howled over the city. Midwives whispered that she came from Irene himself. By age 12, she had bested her brothers in the wrestling ring. By 16, she had led a hunting party into the Tethys Mountains and returned with 3 wild boars tied behind her chariot. Leonthe was not just respected. She was feared. She walked through the Spartan agora with a straight spine and quiet steps. Men lowered their eyes. Women watched her with a strange mix of envy and awe. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. And her words were chosen like arrows, never wasted. But there was something in her that few noticed. When she removed her armor at night, when the torches dimmed and the world outside fell away, Leonthe would stare at the stars, not with a warrior's challenge, but with wonder. There was a softness buried in her, one that battle could not scorch. A yearning, not for marriage, not for conquest, but for something else. Something the Spartan code had no name for. Peace. Magic. Mystery. She never said. What she knew was this: every full moon, when the city slowed and the warriors slept, her body pulled her toward the cliffs above the river Eurotas. She would leave behind her spear, her cuirass, her reputation, and become just a woman wandering beneath the stars alone. The world, she thought, must be bigger than Sparta, bigger than swords and pride. She felt it in her blood like music she couldn't hear but knew was playing somewhere. And then one night, beneath a sky so silver it looked scraped from the edge of a blade, she saw it, gliding across a still pool in a hidden grove. A swan. Unmoving. Watching her. Moonlight rippling on its back, beautiful in a way no war-honed blade had ever been. And from that moment on, Leonthe's life began to shift away from blood and battle towards something softer, stranger, and far more dangerous. The grove was hidden, untouched by the usual grit of Spartan boots. Nestled between 2 cliffs, it whispered of something older than Sparta, older even than Olympus. The trees curved in crescent arches, their branches low and silvered by moonlight. A shallow lake lay at the center, still as glass, and on it, the swan. Its feathers shimmered like woven starlight, either white nor gray, but something in between. It floated with the silence of smoke, cutting across the water with no ripple. Its long neck arched gracefully as if sculpted by divine hands, and its eyes, God's, its eyes, held no animal wildness. No fear, only awareness. Du de la don van qua ban sao kai de doc chin sua. Loi bo ton bo dao timestamp nu yu ka va jing gwin fong catch kachian nima. Leonthe froze at the treeling. Her training screamed caution. Nothing in nature moved like this. No creature stood so boldly before a human. But the swan did not flee. It watched her calmly, expectantly. She stepped forward. It tilted its head. Another step closer. The lake did not stir. She stood at the edge of the water, heartbeat steady but alert, hand resting lightly on the dagger strapped to her thigh. The swan moved again, slowly, deliberately toward her. When it reached the edge of the shallows, it stopped and bowed its head slightly. Leonthe knelt. She had seen thousands of things in her life. War camps burning, bloodied warriors screaming at the heavens, newborn calves gasping for their first breath. But never had she seen something so quiet, so still, so enchanted. She reached out. The swan did not resist. Her fingertips brushed its feathers. Warm, unnaturally warm, as though its body burned with sunlight instead of blood. A feeling stirred in her chest. Not fear. Not fascination, something older, something she didn't know she'd been missing until that very moment. Connection. The swan blinked once and turned away, gliding back into the center of the lake. Leonthe remained kneeling, watching it, unsure what had just begun, but certain it was no accident. The next full moon she returned. So did the swan. And again the next month and the next. No words. No promises, just presence. A ritual born of silence and gravity. By the time autumn settled on the hills, Leontine no longer questioned why. She just knew the swan would be waiting. And her world would never be the same. Seasons turned. Leaves greened, fell, and grew again. The wars continued far below the hills, but in that moonlit grove, time stood still. Only the full moons mattered now. Only those nights. Leontine had once measured her worth in battle scars, victories, and commands followed without hesitation. But now, something softer guided her. Something far older than Spartan law. Each month she returned to the grove with offerings, fresh figs, soft linens, carved trinkets from olive wood. The swan never ate, never acknowledged the gifts. Yet Leontine continued, drawn by an instinct she couldn't explain. The swan was always waiting. It met her at the edge of the water, dipped its head gently, then glided by her side. Sometimes it circled her. Sometimes it simply stood beside her on the shore, its warmth bleeding into the air around it like a hidden sun. She began to speak, not like a soldier, but like a woman who had never been heard before. She spoke of her father's coldness, of how victory never filled the empty space in her chest, of the nights she stared at the sky, wondering if there was more than sword and soil. The swan said nothing, but it listened. She could feel it. Its stillness wasn't silence. It was attention. The kind mortals never gave. The kind no commander, no suitor, no friend had ever offered her. Over time she stopped feeling alone. She braided her hair before each visit, smoothed her robes, sat beside the swan for hours, shoulder touching wing, saying little, yet feeling more than she'd ever felt in a Spartan palace or battlefield. And still, the swan never fled, never aged, never changed. She should have been afraid. There were stories of gods taking animal form to lure mortals into ruin. Stories of punishments for those who loved the divine. But Leontine didn't believe in stories anymore. She believed in the way her hand fit perfectly along the curve of the swan's neck. In the way it bowed its head when she sang quietly into the night. In the way it seemed to wait for her, need her. No words, no promises. But in their silence, something Leontine, daughter of a Spartan commander, was born into a world of war, discipline, and unshakable order. Raised to lead with strength and silence, she earned fear and respect in equal measure. Yet beneath the armor and accolades, a quiet longing stirred, one that had no name in the Spartan tongue. Each full moon, drawn by instinct more than reason, she would wander beyond the city walls to a hidden grove untouched by war. There, beneath silver starlight, she encountered a swan, unmoving, unnaturally warm, and impossibly aware. It did not flee. It waited. Month after month, Leontine returned. The swan was always there, meeting her with stillness and subtle grace. She brought offerings. She began to speak, not as a warrior, but as a woman who had never been heard before. The swan never replied, but it listened, truly listened, in a way no commander or suitor ever had. In their silence, something ancient took root. Love, wordless, sacred, undeniable. What she didn't know was that the swan was no mere creature. It was Apollo, god of light and prophecy, cursed into feather and silence by Zeus himself for daring to speak truth to power. Stripped of voice, of divinity, Apollo had wandered the world for centuries, waiting for the world to remember him, not in temples or prayers, but in kindness. Leontine's presence cracked something inside him. She saw him, not as a god or beast, but as something worth staying for. And impossibly he loved her back. But Sparta sees everything. Leontine's growing detachment from violence, her softer demeanor, and her quiet disappearances did not go unnoticed. Whispers spread, she wandered, she changed, her strikes lacked venom. Her father, Commander Adrastos, confronted her. "Do not forget who you are," he warned. But it was too late. What Sparta had forged in iron, the swan had softened with warmth. Leonthe no longer belonged to a city of stone and scars. She had glimpsed something older than Olympus, gentler than war, and she could not go back. As Leonthe continued her secret visits to the Swan, Sparta began to take notice. Though she was too skilled to be followed easily, rumors began to spread, of moonlit voices, strange omens, and a warrior woman vanishing on full moons. Priests murmured of divine interference, and her once protective silence now cast suspicion. But still, she returned to the grove, to the Swan, to the one place where the world fell away. Yet something had shifted. The Swan had become restless, its warmth sharper, its gaze heavier. Leonthe began to sense the ground itself trembling beneath her, as though nature knew a truth she had yet to face. One night, her sleep was haunted by visions, a silver grove, a statue part man, part swan, and a voice that echoed from within her, not from the heavens. It spoke a warning. Truth will freeze what love has kindled. She woke breathless, the name Apollo lingering on her tongue. Driven by unease, she left Sparta earlier than usual and followed an unfamiliar path through forgotten groves. There, behind a curtain of ivy and moss, she found a ruined altar, etched with a name in ancient, fading gold, Apollon. The truth struck her like thunder. The Swan had never been just a creature. He was Apollo, god of light, cursed and silent. And by loving him, by knowing him, she had broken something sacred. The Swan appeared behind her, no longer glowing, no longer divine, just watching, sorrowful. The grove, once peaceful, now pulsed with ancient tension. Leonthe faced the altar, faced him, and whispered, I know. A single feather fell from his back, disintegrating before it reached the altar. The truth had been spoken. The curse had awakened. As the truth was spoken, the curse finally awakened. The Swan began to unravel, feathers shedding into light, wings folding into arms, webbed feet splitting into toes. And where the Swan had once stood, now knelt Apollo, god of light, in human form, naked, radiant, and broken. But his eyes held only sorrow. Leonthe, stunned and grieving, knelt beside him. Apollo whispered that she was never supposed to know his identity. It had been the one rule that kept the curse at bay. But it was too late. The moment she spoke his name, Zeus's punishment resumed. Apollo began to turn to stone. His divine glow dimmed, his skin hardened, his golden hair stiffened like carved marble. Leonthe clutched his hands, but the transformation was unstoppable. His last breath left him, and his body locked in place, frozen mid-kneel, wings half-formed, forever caught between love and loss. Leonthe did not scream. She didn't rage at the heavens. Instead, she remained beside him in silence. Her armor and sword were abandoned. She never returned to Sparta. She became the silent guardian of the grove, visiting each full moon, brushing her fingers against the cold marble hand, humming songs of remembrance. As years passed, villagers whispered of a woman in the hills, wandering like a ghost. She aged, but never weakened, her strength deepening like the roots of an ancient olive tree. And the statue of Apollo remained unchanged, warm to the touch, some said, as if still alive in some way. One final full moon, Leonthe came for the last time. She sat beside Apollo's statue, rested her head on his shoulder, and quietly passed away. When villagers found her, she was smiling faintly. The statue shimmered faintly with inner light. No shrine was built, but the story endured. And now, when the moon is full and the wind is still, some say the Swan returns, not to be seen, but to remember. Thanks for listening, and I truly hope you have the best sleep after a long day.